Good morning. Welcome to our final week of summer enrichment. This is week 8, and today we're going to be reading a story called The Hungry Coat. It's a tale from a country in Eastern Europe called Turkey, and it's written by Demi, who's the same author as The Empty Pot from last week. And in this story, we're going to be thinking about the theme. The theme is the message that the author wants to teach us, something that he or she hopes we realize through reading this story, and it's universal. Anyone could learn this message, no matter where they live in the world, no matter how old they are. They're important messages that we should all follow in our lives, according to the author. Usually they're not said out loud in the story. Sometimes they can be. Okay, so I'll first read the story, and then we will do an activity together. Some neat artwork in this book. The Hungry Coat. Once upon a time, in Turkey, there lived a funny little wise man named Nasrettin Hoca. He wore a huge white turban and a worn-out coat made of patches upon patches. Riding about on his little gray donkey, he liked to help whomever he could. One day, Nasrettin Hoca heard a great commotion inside. Sorry, I'm having a hard time seeing the words. Inside a caravansary, a hostel for travelers. A frisky goat had gotten loose inside the kitchen. Kicking and prancing, she was breaking all the dishes, knocking over pots and pans, and spilling all the cooking oil. The cook was screaming, and a few travelers were slipping in the oil as they tried to catch the goat. Because he loved goats so much, Nasrettin always carried a sweet apple in his pocket for them. He quickly took out the apple and cut it into little pieces. He lined up the pieces so as the little goat nibbled to the last piece, Nasrettin was able to catch her. Gently, Nasrettin put the little goat back into her pen, and everyone cheered. The caravansary owner invited Nasrettin to eat with the other travelers, but Nasrettin declined, as he was on his way to a banquet at the home of a rich friend. Nasrettin trotted off, waiting to all and happy to have helped. So thinking about what kind of character traits, we talked about the last couple of weeks, character traits, thinking about the character traits that Nasrettin possesses. He's very helpful, we can see. He was so late now that he realized he would not have time to change his coat, which was not only worn out with patches upon patches, but also oily, dirty, and smelling of goat. When Nasrettin's friend opened the door to Nasrettin, he was shocked. He was afraid his other guests would laugh at him for being friends with such a shabby, smelly man. Nasrettin simply jumped off his donkey, hugged his friend, and joined the banquet. He was so happy to be among friends that for a while he didn't notice something very strange. No one was facing him. And you can see him all by himself here. If you can see, his coat is sort of ripped up and holey. All the guests had turned their backs toward Nasrettin, and when the servants brought dinner into the room, the food was served to everyone but him. Before long, Nazaretan was left sitting alone with nothing at all to eat. Several times he tried to start conversation by yelling to a guest at the opposite side of the room, but no one listened and no one responded. So here are all the guests. You can see poor Nazaretan all the way over here in the corner. Nazaretan looked thoughtfully at his friends. Each man was scrubbed until he glistened. Each one was wearing his best coat. Then Nazaretan looked down at his own coat, worn out with patches upon patches, oily, dirty, and smelling of goat. Very quietly, Nazaretan slipped out the door. He mounted his little donkey and began trotting home, when he had an idea. At home, Nazaretan jumped into a tub of hot water, poured in a whole jar of perfumed soap crystals, and scrubbed himself until he glistened and the whole room was filled with bubbles. Make a prediction. What do you think he's going to do? What is his great idea? Nazaretan dried and powdered himself. Then he put on new shoes with tasseled toes, a magnificent new turban with sparkling jewels, and a fine new coat of shining silk with golden threads. Nazaretan preened himself before a mirror. Never had he been so completely well dressed. Never had anyone worn a coat like this one. How fine he looked. Nazaretan strutted out of his house. Everyone nodded respectfully as he swaggered along the street, heading back to his rich friend's home. A servant ushered Nazaretan into the banquet hall, and his smiling host immediately served him food and drink. Everyone smiled and nodded at Nazaretan. What a fine figure he made! What a fine coat! Nazaretan was the most popular man at the banquet. Okay, let's see if your predictions are correct. Nazaretan picked up the choicest grilled lamb chop, but instead of putting it into his mouth, Nazaretan put it inside his coat. "Eat, coat, eat," said Nazaretan. Nazaretan picked up fish fried in vine leaves and roasted eggplant. Opening his coat, he said, "Eat, coat, eat." Nazaretan scooped up pilaf, raisins, and pistachio nuts. Opening his coat, he said, "Eat, coat, eat." Slices of chicken breast stewed in rose water, sugar cakes, flavored jelly, sherbet, sticky baklava, pomegranates, persimmons, oranges, apples, figs, and dates. All of this food Nazaretan stuffed into his bulging coat, shouting, "Eat, coat, eat." Finally, Nazaretan opened his coat once more and poured a whole bottle of wine inside. Then, closing his coat as best as he could, Nazaretan patted his belly and smiled at his host. All the guests were amazed. What was Nazaretan doing? At last, the alarmed host said, "Tell me, my old friend, why are you feeding your coat?" "Surely you wanted my coat to eat," Nazaretan replied. When I first arrived in my old coat made of patches upon patches, there was no food for me. Yet when I came back in this new coat, there was every kind of food for me. This shows it was the coat and not me that you invited to your banquet. Remember this, my friends, said Mazaretan Hoka. If you want to look deeply, look at the man and not at his coat. You can change the coat, but you cannot change the man. A coat may be fine, but a coat does not make a man. Outside, a man may wear a sheepskin, but inside he may wear the heart of a wolf. Many a good man may be found under a shabby coat. With coats, new are the best, but with friends, old are the best. Everyone cheered. The wisdom of Mazaretan calls for a celebration, exclaimed the host. Music and fireworks resounded, and everyone danced under the stars of heaven. And this quote here at the bottom says, he who wears heaven in his heart is always well dressed. The end. So that's the story of the Hungry Coat. I'll be back in a minute with a fun activity for us to do to think about the theme.